Hello, my name is Anenih, and you're joining me on the conversation on AtikuLive. Today we want to talk about the recently held NBA Annual General Conference and things that happened during that event. We saw funny moments where the APC vice presidential candidate came in looking like a shopkeeper in sneakers. We heard the policy positions of most of the presidential candidates who turned up. But there was something that a lot of analysts and people who actually watched the show failed to pick up on. There was a statement made by the vice presidential candidate of the APC, Shettima, which I think is very concerning, but I'll let you be the judge of that. So please listen to what he said.
I've been in the theater of conflict for 18 years. I will lead the troops. My principal is an economic wizard who transformed Lagos into the third largest economy in Africa. He will concentrate on the economy. By God's grace, I will handle the security arm. Not only handle the security arm, I will lead the troops to battle across the length and breadth of this country.
So to join me to discuss what you just heard is Ilemona Onoja. He was the former spokesperson of the presidential campaign for Saraki in 2018. He is currently the spokesperson of the PDP Digital Media Team, and he's a lawyer. What we want to discuss, to my mind, is a constitutional crisis that the vice presidential candidate of the APC appears to have threatened, but I'm not a lawyer, and I will let Ilemona weigh in on that. So welcome, Ilemona.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so what you just heard the Shettima say is that he wants to become the head of the armed forces, whilst the presidential candidate, Tinubu, becomes the head of the economic team. What are your thoughts on that?
First things first, I wonder why they always pick the largest possible gathering of lawyers as a venue at which to threaten Nigerians about a violation or a disregard for the provisions of the Constitution. The statements that Alhaji Kashim Shettima made are reminiscent of the statements that President Buhari made at the 2018 Annual General Conference of the NBA, where he said that national security overrides the rule of law.
Yeah.
Right? It's pretty much the same thing. This is a member of the same group of people come and threaten at no less than the largest gathering of the noble profession, the legal profession, threaten to disregard the provisions of the Constitution. So I know that immediately.
What does the Constitution actually say about
So exactly, that's where I was going to go. I know that some people will ask, what does the Constitution say? Section 130, subsection 2 of the Constitution says, establishes what the functions of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria are. And there are three of them. One, as head of state. Two, as chief executive of the Federation. And three, as commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Federation. Now, this tripod forms the foundation upon which the office of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria lies.
But surely he can delegate. We've seen, the Constitution actually says he can delegate.
Well, the Constitution says that the office of President, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the President can determine the operational use of the armed forces. It is him who says who is deployed where, when, and how. But the Constitution recognizes, and this is provided in Section 218, I think subsection 1, the Constitution recognizes that the President cannot be everywhere at the time. The Constitution recognizes that the President cannot do all these things all by himself. It's not the comical character, Superman, and what have you. So the Constitution gives him the leeway to delegate to a certain category of people. But it's a very narrow leeway. It's not a random, you can delegate to everybody. It's a, you can delegate to a certain category of people. So it is, you can delegate to any member of the armed forces or any security agencies established by law, by a law passed an act passed by the National Assembly. That category of people does not include the office of the Vice President. It doesn't include the person of the Vice President. So we have somebody who's come to television to tell us in his comments, tell us two things that must raise fundamental fears in the minds of every Nigerian citizen. One, he says that the president shall be in charge of the economy if they are elected. Yeah. A big if, that the president will be in charge of the economy and that he will take a lead on security matters and he will be in charge of the security of the nation and he will lead the troops to battle. But he has no such powers. Let me clarify. First of all, Nigerians should be worried. We've just come off, by the time of the elections next year, we'll be coming off 8 years of an absentee president. A president who promised to lead the fight against terror and the wars that Nigeria is involved in from the front, who's been remarkably absent on that score. So what this guy is telling us, what Alhaji Shettima is telling us, is that the presidential candidate of the APC will be an absentee president. That's what he's told us. When he says, I will lead, I will take away one of the roles from the office of the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and arrogate it to myself, what he's told you is that the presidential candidate of the APC plans to be an absentee president. Then let us, drill down on the role that you have arrogated to yourself. That role says that, the president shall determine the operational use of the armed forces, yeah, and that the president may be able to delegate. What he's told is that not the president, not the person elected to fill the office of president, but that he has arrogated to himself the power to probably determine who is appointed as chief of army staff or chief of the chief of any of the arms of the armed forces or any of heads of any of the security agencies, and to determine their deployment. Now, assuming but not conceding that he can do so, and we must stress it, that he simply cannot do so, in threatening or in telling the Nigerian people that he's taken that power, what this man has threatened at a gathering of lawyers is a constitutional coup.
A constitutional coup?
What he has threatened, what is a coup? A coup is removing any of the offices that are arrogated or that are allocated, or any of the powers of any of the offices allocated by the Constitution, and arrogating it to yourself. So when he does so...
The question I'll ask you, because you sort of made a reference to Buhari doing something similar in 2018. Shettima has now come and, like you've said, and I agree completely, threatening the constitutional coup again at the NBA Annual General Conference. Why was there no reaction from the NBA?
I don't know why there hasn't been a reaction. Possibly because maybe they must have missed the import or the import of the statement that Alhaji Shettima made. Possibly, maybe because, they didn't quite, nobody has quite analyzed it from this perspective. Possibly because of that. I don't know why this, but I do hope that they really look at it and that the leaders at the end of the profession at the NBA look at this statement and then distance themselves from it. Because what has effectively happened?
Sorry to interrupt, because I asked because in 2018 when Buhari made this statement, lawyers stood up and applauded it. And it seems like a deliberate strategy by the APC to come to spaces like this to legitimize.
That's exactly what it is. That's what exactly. There's a reason why they go to they target the NBA, where they can go and threaten. So it feels as though, having said it in the largest gathering of lawyers that we have in our country, right, and having not been challenged there, right, there's apparently a seal of legitimacy. They target it specifically for specific reasons, and this is the reason why I hope that there is a pushback from members of the legal profession, that we simply cannot come to an election with someone threatening to violate our constitution in one of the most obscene manners that there possibly can be. Now, there's something else I was going to say before we took a small detour. It's also important to x-ray the person who is threatening to arrogate to himself the power of Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. Who is he, Alhaji Shettima? He was governor of Borno State in 2014 when there was a security advisory that was issued by the governor of Rivers State, who was at the time the supervising minister for education,
I remember, yeah.
saying that there was a threat that a school was going to be attacked in Borno State, and directing that exams should only be held in the state capitals where Boko Haram was operating and causing problems and chaos at the time. And that students should not be allowed to hold exams in cities, WAEC exams. They should all be consolidated in the state capital.
Yeah.
And that the state government should put the logistics in place to transfer them to the state capital so that they can write exams. Alhaji Kashim Shettima ignored that directive. 2 weeks after he ignored that directive,
Chibok.
214 girls were kidnapped in Chibok, most of whom have never been seen again. But not only was that that tragedy, it also opened the door where terrorists suddenly realized that they could target schools, kidnap children in large numbers, and either hold them for ransom or hold them as child soldiers or hold them as I don't want to use that word, or compulsorily marry them off. Right? So in that capacity, he opened a whole new door to terror. A completely new door. Something that had never been in the annals of our national history, had never been seen. It is an almost monthly occurrence since then. Because terrorists suddenly realized that schools are high profile targets and that children are high value victims. Yeah. Right? Do we really want somebody like that in charge of our national security, a role that he arrogates to himself in violation of the provisions of our constitution? My goodness.
There was also an incident that occurred in Asokoro.
What still? I'm going there. What still? In 2013, on Christmas Day in 2013, a group of worshippers who had come to exercise, who had come to practice one of the most valued feasts and festivals of their faith, Christmas, gathered in a church in Madala that was now bombed by Boko Haram. As many as 41 people died, several more injured and maimed, most of them for life. The mastermind of that bombing, Kabiru Sokoto, was arrested shortly after. Where? He was arrested in the government lodge, the Borno State government lodge in Asokoro in Abuja. Now, it begs the question, how was a wanted terrorist mastermind found in the private residence of somebody who says to us that he will arrogate to himself the leadership of our national security apparatus? How? It raises two questions. One, complicity. Was he complicit? That question is a question that we must find an answer to, because that answer has never been given, and over the course of his career, for several years, there have been allegations from within the APC, his own political party, from within the government of Borno State, the person he succeeded as governor, from within his state, from within his tribe, that he has a major hand in the formation, the foundation, and the arming of Boko Haram. Those links have never been washed away. How is such a person threatening to arrogate to himself the leadership and the commandership of our national security apparatus, and doing so boldly at no less a gathering than a gathering of the largest possible gathering of the promoters of the law, of the preservers of the law, than the legal profession? How are we allowing it happen and nobody is pushing it back? My goodness. If we also take into consideration that only a few weeks ago, the Kuje prison, where Alhaji Kabiru Sokoto was serving a life sentence, was broken into, and he himself has fled and is in the wind. And the government has failed, refused, and neglected to capture him and put him back in the manacles that he deserves to be for the rest of his life. And somebody is coming, somebody who is embroiled in that mess somewhere, somehow, is coming to tell us that he arrogates to himself, by himself, in defiance, with arrogance, that he arrogates to himself, that if elected as vice presidential, to fill the office of vice president, he will arrogate to himself the ability, the capacity to be commander-in-chief of our armed forces. My goodness, how are the Nigerian people not outraged? My goodness, how are we not annoyed?
I think, Ilemona, nobody has quite articulated this threat as eloquently as you have. And I think that's why these types of shows, these types of conversations are important. This will go out everywhere. I would personally demand that Olumide Akpata, your friend, issues a statement on this matter. I would demand that all concerned Nigerians condemn what Shettima has said and insist that the APC retract this threat to our constitution and our democracy. And I hope we continue to have these types of conversations.
Before we go, I think it is important that we, and pardon, I didn't mean to interrupt you, sir, but I also think that it's important to speak about what the polar opposite is.
I was actually going to say that, but I will let you continue.
Speak about what the political opposite is. I advocate for the election next year, in February next year, of Alhaji Atiku Abubakar as President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. For a number of reasons, but seeing as we're speaking here about two things, I advocate one, because this is a man who will and who promises to and whose track record shows that has an ability to respect the rule of law, to respect the provisions of our Constitution, not only to respect them, to uphold them to the letter, and not to allow people violate and disregard and dismiss the wordings and the provisions of our Constitution as if they are mere words that are not, as valuable as the paper on which they're written. He's a man who will stand for that truth, one. He's also a man who will not abdicate his responsibility as president. We've been told by no less a person than the vice presidential candidate of the APC that they are fielding an absentee president, a person who doesn't intend to fulfill all the roles of the office. Alhaji Atiku Abubakar stands for that, a person who will fill, who will respect, and who will recognize all the roles that are assigned to his office and who will perform them from day one and for the entirety of his tenure. We're tired of a president, of having leaders who abandon us on the high sea. We're tired of having people who just fade into the background to enjoy the perks of office. Here we are. Here's a man whose picture is behind me, who stands and says, I will do this and I will lead this country right. At this time, in the obvious face of the challenges that we face, we've never been this divided, we've never been this insecure, we've never been this poor, we've never been this uneducated, we've never been without jobs on this level, our currency has never been this valueless, our farms have never lacked this sort of productivity, our children and our aged have never been this unprotected. We need a president that leads this country from the front. We need a president who understands the value and who understands the tripod as head of state, as chief executive of the federation, and as commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Anybody who analyzes the track record of the major candidates will come to the inescapable conclusion that the best person to vote for, the most competent person to vote for at next year's election is no other than the presidential candidate of the People's Democratic Party, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, GCON.
Thank you very much, Ilemona. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
Today we were joined by Ilemona Onoja. He is currently the spokesperson of the PDP Digital Media Team former presidential spokesperson for the Saraki presidential campaign in 2018, and a lawyer who has, I think more than anybody else, has exposed the threat to our democracy and our constitution posed by the APC vice presidential candidate Shettima. Join us again for conversations like this on AtikuLive. My name is Anenih. It was a pleasure having you join us.